When you start waitressing, you obviously want to get trained by a bit of everybody so that you learn all the good things that all the people know and you can leave out all the bad little habits that some waiters might have. And so I was a waitress for a very short period of time right after I finished my fellowship, right after school. And I waited at the fanciest restaurant in a 30-mile radius of where my parents lived in this little beach town. It was a seafood place slash steakhouse. And I had in high school worked at Wolf Trap, which is in Virginia. It's awesome. It's actually a national park that is a concert venue, and it's beautiful, stunning. And I'd worked cash register for people buying beer and hot dogs and bougie ice cream sandwiches with cookies as the bread, you know? I guess there's never really bread on an ice cream sandwich. That would be gross. And I'd like that, but I was just waitressing while I applied for my quote unquote big girl job, and I was figuring out what I was gonna do. So your first week of waitressing, they had me go around each night and I basically apprenticed with a different waiter who had been there for a while. And I was really impressed. All the waiters were really fantastic. It's a nice restaurant, so that made sense. But my second night, I got put on with this girl, and she was awesome. For the sake of this story, we're going to call her Gemma. So I got put on with Gemma, and she was no joke. She was probably 5'1", and she was like a spunky Tinkerbell, saucy, really good, thick Southern accent, so sweet with the people, remembered everything so quick, so with it. And I learned a few things about Gemma in the first few minutes. Number one, she drove a Mustang. Number two, she kept multiple weapons in that Mustang at all times. And number three, you didn't really want to mess with her. So she was a good ally to have on your side. And she was so sweet to me. She taught me everything she knew. She took me around, yada, yada, yada. And at the beginning of our shift, one of the older waitresses, I would say Gemma was about my age, like in her 20s. I was like 22 and she was probably mid-20s. And this older waitress came up to us and she was like, hey, I want to leave early. Could you take my 10 top, which just means a 10-person table, which is a bigger table. And Gemma was like, absolutely. Thanks for thinking of me, whatever, whatever. And the older waitress was like, okay, great. I told the team to give it to you, but the team up front doesn't know if you could handle it. Which I don't know why you would tell a person that, but she did. And Gemma was just like, oh, okay. And then I could tell that it was almost like the stove had just been lit and Gemma was a pot that was simmering because she was pissed. She was pissed. And we're doing our side work and setting everything up. And the management team up front comes up to Gemma and they're like, hey, we're going to give you this 10 top when the other waitress leaves, just so you know, that's going to be your table. And Gemma said to them, thank you so much. And if you ever doubt my abilities again, I want you to say it to my face, not talk about it to other people. To be honest with you, that's a pretty bad butt thing to say. That's pretty tough that she could just say that to the management team. And they totally gaslit her that that had never happened. She had made that up. And then the whole night, it was just kind of simmering. She was like, upset that this thing had happened. And the older waitress ended up staying the night and she didn't give up that table. And so we had been doing our stuff. People had started to come in and then we bounced to the back room and that older waitress was standing there with someone else talking bad about Gemma, being like, yeah, I actually couldn't leave because they didn't think she could handle the table. And she told the staff and we walk in. And mind you, Gemma is short. I told you, little Tinkerbell-esque. Tough girl. All of a sudden, she launches at the other waitress and she starts yelling, I'm a Hick, I'll kill you. And there was this tall guy that I kind of had a crush on at the time who was much too old for me, but he just literally picks her up and he holds her and she's like flailing in the air and she knocks the industrial sized fridge out of place. And just to complete this image for you, you weren't given like a free meal at this restaurant. I don't think they would have cared if we ate, like if the chefs made us something, but you didn't eat, but you could. There were ice pops in the fridge. And so when we had walked in before we overheard that, I had gotten myself an ice pop. So she is flailing. This guy is holding her up and I'm in the corner with my little ice pop, trying to be so small and not pay attention. Anyway, The wait staff team, the people up front, ended up sending me home that night because they told me that they didn't think that was a good night for me to train because they didn't want me to garner those experiences and then later on repeat them. And I wanted to start off with that story today because it's good to be trained by a lot of different people so you learn all their secret skills. But you do have to know that sometimes you learn things from other people that you might not want to hold on to. But I may be wrong. Hi, my name is Caroline May Woodson. You're listening to my podcast, I May Be Wrong. And we're now in the month of December. Oh my gosh, how did we get here? I don't even know. We are going to be talking about tradition this month. I figured that would make sense with all the traditions people do around the holidays with their family and what have you. And so our main quote of the day is going to be, look to the past, to its empire of tradition, and see how many have come before you. And this quote is from Marcus Aurelius. It's from Meditations, which is from the 2nd century. And to be honest with you, I actually found out about this work from a little boy that I was talking to. Not a little boy, that makes me sound like a perv, that sounds gross. A guy, a gentleman that I was speaking to, and we were talking about media and what have you. So Meditations is a journal that Marcus wrote, and he never intended to have it published. And it was really his own philosophical journal, and it was written during military campaigns between 170 to 180 CE, and it was never intended to be put out to the world. It was like your little journal that you keep by your bedside table if you do that. I do, and I don't write in it as much as I should, even though I know I should. But since this was never intended to be published, that's part of why it feels so intimate and grounded and unpolished. Kind of like I talked about a while ago, my Mad Fat Diary, which is one of my favorite memoirs of all time, because it was literally her diary that she just published. So at its core, this book is a guide to Stoic philosophy. So it's teaching you to live with integrity, steadiness, and always self-correcting, a bit of self-discipline, making yourself a better person. And some major themes, so you know what's in there: control and acceptance. So you can't always control external events, but you can control your reaction to them. And it also talks about how peace comes from aligning our actions with reason and accepting what those events are when life happens to you. It also talks about impermanence, how everything, anger to fame to fortune, it's all impermanent. You can't hold on to anything forever. It talks about duty and virtue, humility and power, and oneness and the common good. And it's really about being a good person. So overall, it's a book about how to stay good when life is hard. And I think that's why it still resonates. So some fun facts on our guy Marcus. He likely wrote parts of Meditations in a military tent during a plague. It's not crazy that you're learning how to be a better person. Kind of seems like Anne Frank to me, right? We have this wonderful collection of Anne Frank trying to be a good person in the midst of such a terrible time. So during the Marco-Manic Wars, which I might be saying that wrong, don't kill me, the Roman army was ravaged by what we now call the Antonine Plague, which we think might be smallpox based on our modern knowledge. And Marcus was writing about calm and virtue and being a good person surrounded by all that chaos, which I think is kind of beautiful. And sometimes that juxtaposition does show you the truth of it all. Also, he was reluctant to become emperor. I don't know a lot of people who would be. He really wanted a quiet, philosophical life. And when the Emperor Pius died, Marcus insisted on sharing power, but that was his attempt at humility in Roman politics. Also, just so you know, this is not as much of a fun fact, his personal life was a bit messier than his philosophy. He had 14 children. 14. He would get a TLC show if he was alive nowadays. And most of his kids died when they were young. His surviving son, which was Commodus, eventually became one of Rome's most notoriously disastrous emperors. It's not great. And Marcus agonized a lot about the difference between his ideals and this perfect world he could see and the doing good he could see and how his life actually turned out to be. He did try to practice what he preached, though. He slept on a hard bed, and this was an attempt at self-discipline and fighting against the luxuries that he would get being an emperor. And so he called this voluntary discomfort, and he would sleep on a pallet, and he would wear really modest clothes, which is unlike a lot of the other emperors. Finally, he may have been editing his journal. There's some sections that show evidence that he may have been actively workshopping his thoughts, which is interesting to me. Because for me, when I write down a diary entry, I might look at it a few years later and be like, man, that was crazy, but I don't go in and erase it or change anything. I let my craziness be. So I do think, though, that's him trying to always be a better person. Okay, so like I said, this month we're talking about tradition, and that's where our quote comes from. I'll read it for you again. Our quote from Meditations is, "Look to the past, to its empire of tradition, and see how many have come before you." And the first external source I wanted to recommend to you, some bit of modern media that relates to our main topic of today, is Carol and the End of the World. I just finished this. I watched the whole series on my iPad and I loved it. And I'm dying to have someone to talk to about it because nobody I know has watched it. So Carol and the End of the World is an adult cartoon. If you're not into those, that's totally fine. But if you're like an artsy person or a reader, writer, I really recommend you start watching them. Not the crazy ones, but there's so much good content. And if you're a sappy person, some of them have changed my life. It is about the end of the world, as the name would insinuate. Basically, we're on Earth and there's this very, very normal girl. Her name's Carol. Maybe that's why I like her. Caroline, Carol, we'd get along. Basically, there's something going on. It's never really explained that well in detail, but we know for sure the world is going to end in 7 months and 11 days or whatever the exact countdown is. And as the series goes on, we get closer and closer to the end of the world, which is imminent. They know it's going to happen. And so in this world, Carol is definitely older, like I would say later 30s maybe, and she's a single woman, and she is very shy, very normal, very average, not adventurous, not having a ton of friends, partying all the time. She is like a very, very average woman. Since it's the end of the world, money has basically become not important. People can do really anything they want anytime. So most people, because the end of the world is imminent, they are going around and taking cruises all over. They're going to countries they've never been. They are doing all sorts of crazy things, drugs, trying new clothes, hanging out with people, making some friends and more than friends with more people than they probably would because they know the world is going to end. And so most of the cities are pretty trashed because people aren't following roadways anymore. People are spray painting buildings. They're breaking into things. Nobody cares about running Office Depot anymore, so all the Office Depots are trashed. But there's little Carol, and at the beginning of the series, Carol is feeling really lost. She doesn't like all the partying. She doesn't like the craziness that's going on, and you can just tell she doesn't know what to do with herself. And her family keeps asking her, like, what are you doing? And her parents have decided to be nudists in this world because they can, and the world's going to end, so why the heck not? And everyone's doing all these things, and Carol isn't doing anything. So she starts lying and being like, oh, I'm learning to surf, and telling them all these crazy things, but really she doesn't want that. And so basically, Carol stumbles upon this office, and it's this office that is running just like normal, just like a 9 to 5. Like you walk up to Roslyn where I work now, and these people are posting up to work every single day before 9 a.m., leaving after 5, like the good old corporate Americans that they are. And they're just working as if the world isn't ending. And as the series evolves, we basically see Carol find a purpose. And I wanted to talk about this because in the face of the world ending, all tradition is basically up in the air. Humans are going to be gone. The earth is going to be gone. All of these wonderful things we've learned from past generations, all these communities we built are going to perish. We know that. And there's nothing religious in the show. So whether or not you believe you're going to heaven or what have you is irrelevant. You know that how things are right now are going to end. And in that lack of any structure, Carol finds a way to bring tradition back and to bring community together. And that is why I wanted to talk about it today. Also just been dying to chat to somebody about it because I don't have anybody I can chat to. So I also think that this is like our guy, Marcus. She's practicing a sort of stoicism, and she's bringing back some of these structures and responsibilities and schedules, not because they're going to save her, not because they're going to make the world not end. It's going to end, but it brings back a bit of being human, and it makes you feel a little more alive to feel connected to other people. So yeah, in case you can't tell, I loved this show. Every episode is really different, which I also liked. And it's funny, the world is ending and Carol is still calling to get her monthly dental cleanings, and they have to like call her and be like, hey Carol, you need to stop calling. We're not going to do that for you. The world's going to end. Your teeth could be a little dirty. And it just kind of cracks me up because that kind of reminds me of my mom, just because my mom goes to every doctor's appointment when you're supposed to go, which I love about her. I wish I was more like that. But there's just this ache in Carol for structure, and that same thing as it's always been. Okay, so one of my favorite episodes in the series is the episode where she's with her sister. And her sister has, for the beginning of the series, been traveling the world and sending videos home, and her parents they've been watching the videos together, and they're like, wow, look at her living her best life. And that's a big thing. Everyone keeps telling you to live your best life, which is kind of annoying because this is your only life anyway. And she finally goes on a trip with her sister, but the whole episode is from the perspective of her sister's camcorder, and so it's a bunch of clip and clip and clip and unedited raw footage that her sister is taking of Carol. And I love an artsy form to an episode, and I think that's a beautiful way to show how other people view Carol. It's also nice because we see the sister wanting to get close to her and wanting to understand her, and that's the whole point. She was like, oh, I'm going around the world and I'm learning all these things, but I want to learn about you. I want to know you before the world ends. And I just think it's so clever. It's such a great way. I will say the ending, I don't know what to think on the ending. I was watching the episode and I didn't realize it was the last episode. And so when it was over and the next episode didn't start playing, I was a little disappointed. And then I saw it was a limited series, so there's never going to be another season. It was a bit abrupt for me, and I think that was the point, because the ending of the world will be abrupt. And the end of the world wasn't how the season ended, to be honest with you, not to spoil anything. But it was such a good narrative. So if you watch Carol and the End of the World and you want to talk, hit me up. Also, I'm sorry if you think my voice sounds especially sexy today. I have been sick, so maybe you're welcome. But if you do hear a bit of snuffling, I'm very sorry. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about today is Beautiful World, Where Are You? And in case you haven't been listening to these chronologically, you might be able to tell I'm on a big old Sally Rooney kick. I've now read all of her books except for Normal People, which I started a few years ago when the TV show first came out. And then I did watch the TV show. Really great idea. I watched it right after my last breakup last year. And not an awesome time to watch something like that, I have to tell you. But it is beautiful. And so I probably will read that again. But anyway, I've now read all of them except for that one. And the most recent one I read was Beautiful World, Where Are You? And the quote I wanted to talk about today that ties into what we're talking about is, what if the meaning of life on Earth is not eternal progress towards some unspecified goal? The engineering and production of more and more powerful technologies, the development of more and more complex and abstruse cultural forms. What if these things just rise and recede naturally, like tides? Well, the meaning of life remains the same, just to live and be with other people. So this is by Sally Rooney. It took me a bit to understand kind of what was going on, to be honest with you. Perhaps I wasn't paying as much attention as I ought to, but it's about these two girlfriends, female friends. We're really, really close, but now they're living very different lives. And we get to see a bit of their life in real time. And then we see the emails that they write back and forth to one another. And actually, in doing my research for you, I found out that this book, and it's actually in the book itself. So I had read a little bit on this, but I hadn't read the whole poem. Sally Rooney wrote this based off an old poem, and it was written in 1788. It's written by Friedrich von Schiller, and it's called The Gods of Greece. And this is a translation, but beauteous world, where art thou gone? O thou, nature's blooming youth, return once more. Ah, but in song's fairy region now lives thy fabled trace so dear of yore. Cold and perish, sorrow now the plains. Not one godhead greets my longing sight. Ah, the shadow only now remains of yon living image bright. O beautiful world, where art thou flown? O face of nature's purest bloom, return. Now only in the fairy land of song still lives the image for which we yearn. In barren morn, once blooming fields, no godhead lights up nature's visage. How from the world's every living image, not but a shadow yields. Basically, if you couldn't get the gist of that, this poem is about being alive and wondering when your life is gonna begin, or when life is gonna be what it should be, right? It's the idea of like, oh, I'm here living and all these other people are over there living, and why are they living in a world that I'm not in? And I know the world can do all these wonderful things. I've seen it do it for other people. When is that going to happen for me? Kind of like When Will My Life Begin feels very Fiona and Shrek the Musical. If you know what I'm talking about, don't think I'm a nerd, please, because I said that. And it kind of centers also around the idea that it can feel like your world's falling apart and like you're being robbed of this thing that other people are having. And so are you still allowed to care about your friendships and love and life when everything else is falling apart? So our main characters, Eileen, Alice, Simon, and Felix, they struggle with this disconnect from human tradition like love, sex, letters, friendship, and the modern world. Sometimes it feels like in order to live, I can't be focusing on all those other things. And in order to focus on those other things, I can't be in the modern world. And so it's kind of talking about that. And overall, it basically talks about the point that humans have always been overwhelmed. Like Marcus, our original quote of today, humans have always lived amongst a plague. For him, it was smallpox. For us, it was COVID. Humans have always had to figure out when something crazy is going on, how to still have a little life. I think it also talks about this fear that everything's going to end. People have always felt that. People have always known about their mortality, and that's hard to reckon with. And I think it's nice. I think it talks about how we're not the first generation to feel lost. We're not the first generation to feel like this is all pointless. You're not the first person to waste a day rotting away. Maybe you're on your phone and other people didn't have phones, but you're not the first person to sit around on your couch and wonder when life's really going to begin. These people have been doing that forever, and I think that's deeply reassuring. I have some more quotes from you in case you want to read it. I really liked it. I think Intermezzo has been my favorite of Rooney's books. Then I would say this one, Beautiful World, Where Are You? Then I would say Conversations with Friends. All were good. All were worth a read. That's probably how I rank out. And in case you're thinking about reading it, here are some other quotes for you. But if you think there's any chance that I could make you happy, I wish you would let me try, because it's the only thing I really want to do with my life. If a man said that to me, that'd be it. We'd be hitched. We'd be hitched. I do have to tell you, there's this one guy that I was seeing for a little bit, and he called me tiny. He told me that I was the tiniest girl he'd ever been seeing. And I'm taller, or I'm 5'7", and I've never been called tiny in my entire life, ever. And that alone, I was like, okay, so I guess I'm gonna marry this guy. I guess that's it. And I didn't, spoiler alert, but anyway, funny. And we hate people for making mistakes so much more than we love them for doing good. And that's the easiest way to live, to do nothing, say nothing, and love no one. Kind of pessimistic, but can be true. Then if God wanted me to give you up, he wouldn't have made me who I am. And then isn't death just the apocalypse in the first person? That kind of reminded me of Carol and the End of the World, so I thought I had to include it. And then lastly, at times I think of human relationships as something soft, like sand or water. And by pouring them into particular vessels, we give them shape. One of my dad's friends got married, and I got to go. I was the only kid there, and they did the sand thing. Do you know what the sand thing is? Where there's an empty vase and she has one color sand and he has another color sand and you pour it in. And it kind of reminded me as a kid, my parents would take me to the strawberry festival and you could pick out a cool shaped glass and you could pour rainbow colored sand. Their sand wasn't rainbow sand, but that's what it felt like to me. And I don't think I'd want to do that on my wedding, but I like the idea of those traditions. And I like the idea that here's this thing, a relationship, you get to figure out how it's shaped. And I know for a fact, I've been reckoning with this a lot. I am like the only single friend right now of all my girlfriends, and a lot of them are very, very happy, which is what we want. That's the goal for everybody. And I've come to realize that all of those people are specifically the right shape for them. They're happy because they're both together. It's not like if they were all to switch around like a little game of musical chairs and they switch boyfriends and girlfriends with each other. It's not like they would all be happy. It's because they're the right fit and they can make their relationship their way. And I think that's reassuring because when you're handed a relationship, you get to choose what it looks like. You get to make that. And so of course you're going to like it because you get to make it. And if you can't make it and somebody else is shaping it for you, probably not somewhere you want to be. Probably not, probably not. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about today is a song called The Airplane Over the Sea, and that is by Neutral Milk Hotel. I love this song. I've listened to it for years. Obviously, you should listen to this rather than me yapping on about it. If you're listening to this on Spotify, I'll link it in the show notes. But how the lyrics go, what a beautiful face I found in this place that is circling all around the sun. What a beautiful dream that could flash on the screen in a blink of an eye and be gone from me. Soft and sweet, let me hold it close and keep it here with me. And one day we will die, and our ashes will fly from the airplane over the sea. But for now we're young, let us lay in the sun and count every beautiful thing we can see. Love to be in the arms of all I'm keeping here with me. And then it goes, what a curious life we have found here tonight. There is music that sounds from the street. There are lights in the clouds, Anna's ghost all around. Hear her voice as it's rolling and ringing through me. Soft and sweet, how the notes all bend and reach above the trees. Now how I remember you, how I would push my fingers through your mouth to make those muscles move. That made your voice so smooth and sweet. And then it ends, and we can meet on a cloud. I'll be laughing out loud. I'll be laughing with everyone I see. Can't believe how strange it is to be anything at all. Now, this is something I didn't know. I'd never heard this. I'd never thought it in my little tiny brain. But it's largely guessed that this whole album is inspired by Anne Frank. I don't know how we would have gotten there. I haven't listened to the album in its entirety. There are a few other songs I like from it. So it's often read as a meditation. Artists love to call something a meditation. I'm not saying that's wrong, but it's just a funny thing that people do. It's often called a meditation on Anne Frank's life and death and the fragility and wonder of human experience and the tradition that we all carry on through it. So the lyrics never explicitly mention Anne Frank. Like there's no thing that says, this is about Anne Frank, but it references to a girl in hiding, letters, memory, and loss, kind of evoking her story. It also talks about how weird a thing it is to be alive at all. I feel like that's basically what we're getting at today. It is stinking weird to be alive, but tradition can help you make sense of it all. I used to always want to wear a colored wedding dress. I love to be different for the sake of being different. I'm working on that. I'm trying to get that out of my system. I think it's like the manic pixie girl disease or something. And one day I just was like, all the women before me have worn white wedding dresses. Not all, but in my culture, my part of the world. And I was like, that is a cool thing I could get to be a part of. And so that's something that kind of clicked in my brain. It's also the same thing with religion. I think it's really important that if you're brought up in a faith, it's an amazing thing, I think, to get to learn that. And it's important to poke around and figure out what you believe for you. In a lot of ways, as I have figured out where I lie on all that, I feel a lot closer to my grandmother who passed away because it feels like something I'm doing that she did. And I can see how being in touch with a community of any sorts, whether it's religious or not, can make you feel more alive, if that makes sense. But I wanted to end on this image today that I couldn't get out of my head when I was prepping. So I studied abroad in Greece after my freshman year of college, and I went alone. I lived with complete strangers. I didn't know anybody. And from our first apartment, we had a really long walk to class. It was like 30 minutes in the morning. That's not terrible or anything. We had 2 apartments. I know I just said first. I'm going to explain that. Our first apartment ended up having mold really, really bad, and we all got sick. And so they moved us to another apartment. But in our first apartment, when I first got there, it was a 30-minute walk to class every day. And we all would go together because we normally had classes around the same time. And I just remember people were always on the streets in Greece. It's not like America where we hide in our homes all the time. People were always out and about and talking to one another, and I really liked that. And I was walking to class one day, and this family was outside just hanging out on the street, and they had some little girls, and obviously most of the people there understand English and they speak English, but a lot of people are largely speaking in Greek, at least to one another. And these little girls, their parents were speaking Greek to them, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But then they were hopping and singing around, singing the Full House theme song. Clearly, they had been watching Full House that morning, and they were hopping around and singing that little song, running in a circle. And I don't know, I kind of feel like I'm going to cry talking about that. I'm sure you guys think I'm so dramatic when I say that, but I something about that little image makes me feel so human. Not that Full House is even this deep thing, but the fact that a show that I watched as a little girl, I watched reruns on Nickelodeon, these little girls are also watching and they're singing along to the same songs that I've sang along to. It makes you feel important in a way. And I suppose that's what tradition does, is it gives us something that we're carrying on and giving to other people, that we're actually are a part of the world, because humans have this deep, deep desire to be remembered. And I think tradition is one of the ways that we remember others and that we will be remembered. But I may be wrong. My name's Caroline May Woodson. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later. Bye.